Hello, Lynn Watts here. Today, I'm going to be talking about feelings or emotions. And in particular, I'm going to be talking about how to help students make good choices about their emotions. I think the idea or the concept of emotional regulation is something that's talked about frequently. And so the question is, how do we teach that, especially in a large group setting, to students, and how do we help them understand how to recognize their emotions, first of all, and then secondly, what to do with those emotions once they are able to recognize them. Before I get started on the actual details of that, I just want to say if you would like a follow-up lesson on how to do this, I certainly many of my lesson plan books have something on emotions, but I have a particular one on empathy and emotions, which I think is an important concept that you want to teach down the line to students about emotions in my elementary school counselor book of lesson plans, volume 2. All right, so not volume 1, but volume 2. And this one, of course, I have all my lessons divided up into what you might teach different times of the year. And it's February right now. And, what maybe you're kind of thinking, gosh, I've taught so many of the things I plan to teach. What can I do now? And I think teaching how to handle, especially negative emotions, is always a great thing to teach. You can't really do too much of that because that's often one of the things that we as humans deal with so often, but it's also something that in a school, I'm sure many times you're talking to students about negative emotions. And then the second aspect of taking that to the next level is using those feelings, recognizing feelings in others, and developing empathy for others and how you manifest that. How do you share empathy with others? So this particular lesson is called Walk in Their Shoes, Developing Empathy for Others. And like all the lessons in this book, the great benefit of it is already aligned with standards, objectives, ASCA standards and objectives. It has several activities you can do with different grade levels. It has books you can read if you're wanting to read a picture book. And then it has an intro with lots of questions and sort of the concepts that you want to teach. So again, that's Walk in Their Shoes in my volume 2 book. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So let's talk about how you can go about designing a lesson around feelings. What I usually did is I had some really nice big cutouts of children expressing a feeling. And I would cover up what the feeling was: angry, sad, so on. Very simple emotions. And I would just hold it up and get students to guess what the feeling was. It usually wasn't too hard. Although there were some that were maybe a little more subtle, a little more difficult to identify. So that was a good way to start because you're already getting some involvement there. You're not just lecturing about feelings, you're getting kids to participate. So you're recognizing both positive and negative, and then that's a perfect lead into how did you know that this was somebody who was angry? So that's a great time. Then you can talk about body language, you can talk about cues that they notice just from looking at them, but you can also talk about more internal signs like a racing heart, or somebody's afraid, maybe they're kind of shaking, that sort of thing. You can then, of course, divide the feelings up into positive and negative, and talk about what do we do with feelings, but in particular, what can we do about negative feelings? So I've done a number of videos, of course, on handling anger and so forth, so I'm not going to get into that right now, but the important part about regulating feelings always begins with being able to recognize and label feelings. If a student doesn't actually have a name for it, it's much harder to talk to them about how are you going to manage that feeling? What are you going to do about that feeling? Now, when you're feeling angry, you're feeling frustrated, or things don't go your way. What do first thing is to label it and help them recognize how they feel. And of course, it's important to recognize positive feelings as well as negative. The next aspect of that is helping students to take responsibility for that feeling. In other words, to recognize that they don't have to let that feeling be in charge of them, that they have a brain and their brain can take charge of the feeling, which means simply they recognize the feeling. And secondly, they recognize they have choices about what they're going to do. The feeling does not have to run them. Their brain, their decision making capability can decide how they're going to handle it. So taking responsibility for it. And also part of that responsibility is recognizing that they're in charge of their feelings, even when they don't feel like they are. So, of course, this is where you can begin to teach some strategies for getting in a position where they feel back in control. And that can be some breathing techniques. It can perhaps be some visualization, some phrases that they can say to themselves, having a mantra that they say. For instance, if the feeling is one of great frustration because things aren't going their way, then perhaps their mantra needs to be something like, I can do hard things, or I can make myself calm. I don't have to make myself frustrated. I can think calming thoughts. I can take calming breaths. I can calm my body down. All right. So I think those are really the three things that we can do to help students begin to manage their emotions. Number one is labeling, recognizing feelings, not just having a name for it, but also recognizing how their body feels in that feeling. Secondly, recognizing that they are able to gain control of that, and then teaching them some techniques for how to do that, whether that's positive self-talk, whether that's some breathing, whether that's taking a break. I'm sure you know all these many different strategies that you can use. So I hope that you find this helpful. And as I mentioned in many of my lesson plan books, I'll put some links below. There are in-depth lessons in terms of how to lead the discussion and how to use this kind of information in different grade levels. As always, I want to thank you so much for listening, and thanks for all the wonderful things that you do to matter in students' lives.